Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our 9th session of the Staff Services Confidence Builder Series. Super happy that you guys could join us this afternoon for It's All in the Cards, a discussion about mission cards and all the other kinds of cards that are out there. I think it's going to be very informative, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more today, and hope you are as well. Just a couple reminders before we get started. And also, I just want to say my name is Susan Wananen, and I'm happy to be back. And I want to thank Sherry Lewis as well as Janella for facilitating while I was gone, as well as the presenters. So I got to watch the recordings yesterday, and I got to see Marcus and Cindy and Julie, and it was I hope you guys found those topics interesting. I thought they were, and I was glad to see that a lot of people had attended. So first of all, just in case there's somebody new on the call, and I think most people have been here before for at least 1 week, but the goal of this series is to build confidence in your knowledge and skills with regards in particular to staff services, so that if you are going out this season, either on your first deployment in staffing or your 15th, you might feel more confident about going out and knowing what to expect and what the new features might be in Volunteer Connection and what your tasks might involve. This is really supposed to be a safe environment, so if you have questions, please feel free to type a question in the chat box, especially when the presentation is going, so that we can pick those up as we go along. And then there will be time at the end also to raise your hand and ask specific questions to our presenter. Please mute yourself just to keep the background noise to a minimum, and turn off your camera when you're not speaking. And then, as you probably know, the sessions are recorded so people can watch them who aren't available on Thursday afternoons at 1. And so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve Bonine. So Steve is an old friend of mine because he's from the region where I first started in Red Cross, it was the Minnesota region, now it's the Minnesota-Dakota region. But Steve, would you like to join us?
No, I'm going to go away now.
Please come back.
All right, I'm back. I'm sharing my PowerPoint here. Folks, I'm not big into PowerPoints, and this is a very crude one, but I figured that it would be nice to have something to take away. I have an idea that much of what we talk about that's interesting will probably be tangential to the PowerPoint. So please, and Susan said this, but I will reiterate it. Please ask questions. This is your session. We guess at what you want to hear, but we may not guess very well. So the questions are extremely important. So today we're going to talk about mission cards. It's not going to be as interesting as last week, where we had this blockbuster session about the new Volunteer Connections thing and daily check-in and all kinds of wonderful stuff. This is nothing new, but it's kind of interesting. I am the coordinator for the team that loads these cards. We have an absolutely amazing team of volunteers that just sits around and waits for one of you to request a mission card be activated, and they do an amazingly good job at that. So as a quick pitch, if you know anyone who might be interested in that job, let me know. It would be nice to add a couple of folks to the team as we get into the season, if there is such a thing as a season anymore. Rather than putting all of this reference information at the end, I decided to put it at the beginning. As always, somebody needs to be muted. There we go. Thank you. The exchange is your place to go for information. There is a mission card hub, which contains all of the good stuff about mission cards, and I've got a couple of the other ones listed here with teeny tiny little URLs that you can see. There is also a class on Edge, and I believe it to be a required class, for mission cards and overview for card holders. It's short. It's relatively painless. I recommend it so that people don't get into trouble. So what is a mission card? I suspect that 90% of you know this already, but we give mission cards to folks who deploy. They are a preloaded debit card. Although when you put a transaction in, we want it to be as credit. Don't ask me why. They are used for incidental expenses, which is a euphemism for meals, gas for rental car, things like that. They are not used for lodging, except on very special occasions, like if someone gets stuck because of a canceled flight at a airport en route. They can get authorization to get a room on their mission card. Certainly not an airline ticket. We had someone we actually had someone charge an airline ticket to a mission card once, and that caused me 3 years of grief. Parking at the airport is not an authorized expense. You need to be taken to the airport by a friend or an enemy or an Uber or whatever. Normally, these are assigned by the region as a part of the assignment process. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Employees use their T card. They use it just like a mission card with the same rules in place. If you run into a situation where you're deploying an employee who does not have a T card, they can be issued a mission card. They again have the same rules in place. If you do run into this, and in any case, show these folks as MDA in their assignment. And there are a few reasons for that. One of them has to do with 5266. The other one has to do with lodging. The new lodging code in Volunteer Connection uses the fact that someone is MDA in order to deduce that they're going to need lodging, which makes perfect sense. So you want to mark the folks who are coming from out of the area as MDA because they're going to need lodging. We used to call these things staff cards. You'll see staff card floating around in various places here. It's a wonderful illustration of the fact that the Red Cross does not move very quickly when it comes to changing the name of things, except when they shouldn't move quickly, in which case they move quickly. I mentioned that mission cards are normally assigned as part of the assignment process at the region. The easiest way to do this is when you do the assignment when the pop-up, you're looking at the screen where you're putting in all the other information. Put in the proxy number or numbers. You might be issuing someone both an MDA and an MCPC card, and if you don't know those abbreviations, we'll talk about that in just a second. When you put that proxy number in, when you click go, Volunteer Connection will send an email to the appropriate place asking for the card to be activated. Now that's a lie. What I just said was a lie. If you were doing a virtual assignment, it wouldn't be a lie. But when you assign someone on the ground, the next step is the pre-assignment health questionnaire. When they complete their pre-assignment health questionnaire, assuming that they're accepted for the assignment, that's when the email goes in to activate the mission card. So don't get upset if you do an assignment and you don't immediately see Volunteer Connection obediently sending an email to activate the mission card, if it's an in-person assignment. If you don't have the proxy number when you do the assignment, that's fine. You can later go into that individual's DRO history in their profile. And at the bottom of DRO history, you will see a link that says Edit Current Assignment. And if you click on that, you'll be back at the same exact pop-up that you saw when you assigned the person, or somebody saw when they assigned the person. And that's where you can type in the proxy number, and the same thing will happen. Now, we have staff services folks that get a little bit ahead of the curve sometimes, and they in-process folks before they've even left for the airport. Once the person has been in-processed, there is no current assignment to edit. So as a regional recruiter, you can't go in and edit the current assignment in DRO history because there's nothing to edit. If you need to issue a mission card in that circumstance, then you need to do it the old-fashioned way. And some of us haven't been around long enough to even know there was an old-fashioned way, and the ones of us who have mostly forgotten it. But what we used to do is compose an email to disasterstaffcard@redcross.org and send in some information requesting that the card be loaded. Same information that Volunteer Connection automatically provides now. You can still do that. And it works the same way as it always did. You only need to do that if you can't do it the better way of putting the proxy into the assignment in Volunteer Connection. And if all else fails, you can have staffing issue a mission card when the person checks in. Those of you who have done that job know that the last thing in the world you really want to do when you're checking people in is issue a mission card. But it is a fallback, and it still can be done. The other thing I will mention is make sure that you get a confirmation that the card's been loaded. When our fine mission card team loads the card, they will send a confirmation to you indicating that the card has been loaded. Email is not infallible, in spite of the fact that we all think it is. So sometimes these things do get lost, and there are times when we can't load the card. And it's nice if you read that email and say, oh my goodness, this card didn't get loaded. I need to take evasive action here. Humans don't like 13-digit numbers. I'm absolutely astounded that we don't get more problems with people not typing the proxy number incorrectly, but we don't. We get very few of those, but we do get a few. So if you make a typo entering the proxy, we're not going to be able to load the card. Sometimes in the inventory system, for whatever reason, cards get marked as destroyed. Those we can't load. So there are times, they're rare, but there are times when we can't load the card and we send you a confirmation that says card not loaded. So please read your email. I will also mention that the email address that's used here is the email address that you use to log into Volunteer Connection. Now, most of us use our Red Cross email addresses to log into Volunteer Connection, But there are a few of us who didn't have a Red Cross email address when we signed up for Volunteer Connection. So be aware that the email address is not necessarily your Red Cross email. It's the one that you used to log into Volunteer Connection.
Hey, Steve, this is Susan.
Go ahead, Susan. I was just going to stop and ask for questions.
I was just wondering if you, what happens if you have to stop a person from deployment?
Ah, good question. Excellent question. What happens is when you put in the stop, there's a line that comes up at the bottom of the form that people tend to not see. And it says, do you want to deactivate the mission card that was loaded for this individual? And the default is yes, and that's normally correct. So if you have assigned Susie and then Susie gets sick and can't go and you put in a stop, normally you would want Susie's card to be deactivated. And what happens there, just as a behind the scenes piece of information, an email is sent, but not to Disaster Staff Card. It's actually sent to Finance, asking them to deactivate the card. Once the card is deactivated, it is dead. We cannot reactivate it. So occasionally we see the situation where we've assigned Susie to DR 123 and then all of a sudden we need to change her to DR 456. And in that case, we put a stop in for 123, but we don't want to deactivate the mission card because we're going to use it for the new assignment. So pay attention to the bottom of the screen for that message that's not real visible. Mostly you won't care, and mostly the default is absolutely fine, but just be aware that it exists. You got any other good questions, Susan?
No, that was the main one. I just wanted, so that person who's stopped, who's holding that deactivated card, they can essentially just cut it up at that point and have to get a new one from their chapter before they deploy again, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
And I will mention also that mission cards are good for exactly one DR. We do have people who get confused, or maybe they think they're not confused, and they try to use their mission card from their previous DR on their new deployment. That's a no-no. That doesn't work. Finance doesn't like that.
What if you have like a week off between your deployments to the same DR?
In that case, you can use the same card.
Okay.
And if you've destroyed it, we can issue another one. It's one of the. Yes.
We have a couple of things in chat that I just thought were worth mentioning. I wanted to say thank you to Melissa. She posted all of the registrations for the EDGE training for mission card cardholder overview, and also comments. Volunteers can change their first listed email address in their Volunteer Connection account. So thank you, Melissa.
Yes, but it works about 78% of the time. I don't want to discourage people from doing that, but just be aware that it's not a simple change. It's not going into your profile and just changing what's in the field. There's a process that you have to go through to do that. So expect a bigger deal than you thought you were going to do. But yes, I think in the long run, especially folks in staff services, you need to log into Volunteer Connection with your Red Cross ID. Makes things easier. All right. We've had at least a couple of questions. I keep clicking on the wrong right arrow to advance the slide. There are several flavors of mission cards. Now, they're all the same mission card. They're all the same piece of plastic. but they are handled differently. The most common one is an MDA card. It's the one that we give to workers who are deploying to a national DR normally. They're not staying at home. It's a $450 initial load. These amounts are calculated to generally be enough to handle a normal deployment. Now, there's two words in that sentence that are mushy. So it's not unusual for people to need a reload, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Someone asked, with inflation and things getting higher, getting more expensive, especially gasoline, will this be adjusted? And good question. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that I put gas in my rental car on my last deployment and was rather surprised when I got the pre-authorization for $45, thinking that was at least twice as much as I needed, and it didn't fill the tank. So maybe this will get changed. M&T, another kind of card. This is for people who are staying at home, not staying at a hotel or a staff shelter or whatnot. It's $150 initial load. It's for meals and transportation. Personally, I think it's a pain. I don't understand why we need to have two flavors of mission cards like that, but it's way above my pay grade. The other thing that the M&T card is used for, someone in their infinite brilliance decided that we wanted to be able to reimburse virtual assignment people for telephone expenses or technology expenses to the tune of $50. And then someone said, well, that's all well and good. How are we going to do that? And some other brilliant person came up with the idea of doing it with a mission card. So for these folks who request this $50 reimbursement, they get issued an M&T card. It gets issued just like any other mission card. Often by this time, the person's already deployed, so you're going to use the old-fashioned way to do it, but not necessarily. It comes into the mission card box just like any other request, and our brilliant mission card loading team deduces that this individual is assigned virtually, and instead of loading the card for $150, they load it for $53. $3 being an allowance for a fee, a card fee. You'll also, by the way, this is a tangent, you'll see the abbreviation TNM, not M&T, but TNM. You'll see it less now because they've changed the label on the screen in Volunteer Connection, but it used to be used as a term that meant type of mission card. So TNM meant type of mission card, and its subsets were M&T and MDA. So yes, that was a little confusing. Still is. Third kind of mission card is affectionately known as MCPC, Mass Care Procurement Card. The party line here is that this is issued to workers in a specific set of gaps, and that's on the next slide, so that they can purchase supplies, mass care supplies, before logistics is deployed, is set up on the job. Now, the reality is that, yes, some MCPCs are actually issued that way. This is supposed to be for level 4 and above. We get them for all kinds of 3s and 2s. And explain to me, if you will, how if an MCPC is supposed to be used before logistics has got their act together, how we can get a request for an MCPC 3 weeks, 6 weeks into a DRO. I do not understand how that is possible. So that's Steve's off the slide comment on MCPCs. There is a separate line in the assignment screen for MCPCs. So if you are deploying someone to a level 4 or above and you have instructions that you're supposed to deploy people in mass care with an MCPC, you can put both proxy numbers in at the same time. It's a very purple glass, but what's inside it is just water. Last flavor of mission card, and these are relatively uncommon, but you need to know that they exist because when you need them, you really need them. Yes, it is possible to assign a mission card to an individual before the DR number is assigned. And that's called a DSARS card. DSARS being the incident, the system that tracks incidents before they grow up into DRs. These can be either MDA or M&T. And the hooker is that the request has to come from the RDO, directly from the RDO, from the RDO's mailbox. Obviously, you can't request these using volunteer connection because there's nothing to assign the person to. The DR doesn't exist yet. But they do exist, they are used, and that's how they work. Back to MCPCs, these are the gaps that are eligible for MCPC. Don't ask for the logic here, please. I don't have any. If you request an MCPC for someone whose gap is not on this list of gaps, it will not be loaded. It will be returned to you. Now, it is possible to get an MCPC for someone who has a gap that's not on this list. And the procedure for that is that the job director must approve it. The easiest way to do this, and the way that's almost never used, is to have to send the request to the job director, have the job director send it to Disaster Staffing Center, which is the email for RMS. They will approve it and forward it to Disaster Staff Card. Now, the reason for that little roundabout Robin Hood's barn, we, the mission card team, have to have an approval from our chain of command before we can load an MCPC off gap. And our chain of command is RMS. RMS has to have an approval from the job director. So that's why it's a little bit tricky, and normally it doesn't work that way in terms of the way the email flows, but they get done. They get loaded. Last comment on this slide, staff services ambassadors, which you guys would be interested in. The problem here is there is not a specific gap assigned for staff services ambassadors. So we get the request, it doesn't show an eligible gap, and it gets returned. In this case, we just need to know that the person's a staff services ambassador, and the card will get loaded. That's a little glitch in the system.
Steve,
I'll stop again for questions.
Thanks. I was just wondering, are all the cards loaded with the same amount? All the MCPCs?
Yeah, yes, I guess I left that off the slide. MCPCs are $500.
And that's no matter what their role is.
That's correct. Now, excuse me, there are exceptions on a DRO basis. Occasionally, we'll get word that DR 123, the MCPCs are supposed to be loaded for $1,000, or the MDAs are supposed to be loaded for 800. That's rare, but it does happen, and it's normally on a DRO basis. You may remember a few years ago when we were sending people to the islands, we were sending them with 2 MDA cards, which I believe are loaded for $900. That's the kind of exception I'm talking about. Other questions? One of the most common questions that we get is from someone who has a worker who says, my card is not working. Now, what we really don't want you as staffing to do is just issue them another card. Because about 99% of the time, the reason that the card is not working has nothing to do with the piece of plastic. And if you issue them another card, it's not going to work either, because they're going to do the same thing that they're doing that's causing the initial problem. So please, 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 let us know. Okay, send us an email. Susie's card's not working. It's nice if you would give us the proxy number, but we're smart enough to figure it out if we have to. And we have this marvelous thing that we can look at called the transaction log that often gives us hints as to why Susie's card is not working. And here are the most common causes. You can only withdraw $105 from an ATM in one transaction. People, they want to get $200. That will work, never will. As an aside, and this comes up in a minute, please don't have your people go to the ATM and withdraw a wad of money before they deploy. They may end up having to return it, and returning it is a pain. Using the wrong pin is a common one. The pin is on the insert, the paper insert that the card is on. The last 4 digits of the person's telephone number are what is called the access code. And this is used when you talk to the bank to identify who you are, but it's not the PIN for the ATM. For some reason, and don't ask me why you would want to put in a transaction for a debit card as credit, but if you put it in as debit, it's going to bounce. So another common problem we see is transactions being put in as debit, and sometimes it's not the cardholder who's doing this. The cardholder is giving their card to a clerk or somebody at a store or whatever, and they're putting the card in, the transaction in as debit. That will cause problems. Also causing problems is people who are smart enough to try to get cash back on their transaction. You can't do that with these cards. It will cause the entire transaction to die. We try to make people understand that there are times when a hold is put on the card. One of the common ones is at gas stations. We ask people to go inside and pay inside rather than using the card at the pump. I don't think these cards work at the pump at all anymore. I should have tried this on my last deployment. I understand that they have changed the rules, and if you try to use the card outside at the pump, it just won't work. Period. Done. Which is fine. There is a list of vendors that you can't use the card at. How's that for English? Every vendor out there has an indication of what kind of vendor they are. And there's a list that actually comes with the mission card of vendor types where you can't use the card. You can't use it to buy liquor. You can't use it to buy guns. Well, sometimes this trips us up. Sometimes vendors are categorized in one category when it really isn't obvious that they should be. One of the funny ones is sometimes we have shelters at casinos. Casinos are wonderful places for shelters. They have lots of lodging. Often they donate it. Great place to have a shelter. Not a good place to use your mission card, however. And the last one on the list, which is more common than you might think, is using the wrong card. You have this situation where 5 people go out for dinner together, and at the end of the meal, they all hand in their mission cards to pay for the meal, and they realize they didn't put their name on their mission card because they all come back and everybody says, oh, wonder which one is mine. Which is another reason to encourage people to put their name on their mission card. The other time that this happens, and I made short mention of this before, is when people try to use a mission card from a previous deployment. Not a good idea. So again, my bottom line on this is please talk to us or email to us. It really breaks my heart when I hear the worker who during out processing says, gee, my mission card hasn't worked for 3 weeks. Well, duh, why didn't you tell somebody? So encourage your workers to talk to you and then talk to us. Send us an email. If you run into a lost or stolen card, call the bank immediately. Now, if it's a stolen card, it really makes a difference on how quickly you let the bank know, because they can kill that card. If you wait a day, that gives whoever stole it a day to pull all the money off. And then the way this is handled, the person doesn't get another free ride, okay? What happens is you as staffing send an email to Mission Card Reload with hopefully with both proxy numbers, although at least with the replacement proxy number, and they will transfer the balance from that stolen card onto the replacement card. That's the way that kind of replacement works. Expiration. This is a fun one. So mission cards expire, with air quotes, at the end of the month after they're activated. So any card that's activated this month, this would be June, will die at the end of July. Doesn't matter if it's loaded today or tomorrow or on the last day of the month, it will die at the end of July. Now, air quotes and die are an indication that I'm lying to you just a little bit. Actually, what happens is that no new transactions can go in after that time. The card is still alive and well, because if someone did a purchase on like the last day of the month, it still needs time to clear. So we can't just kill the card on the last day of the month. It has to stay open. And that's behind the scenes. You don't need to worry about that. There is an expiration date that's actually printed on the mission card. We can't load cards within 90 days of that date. So don't think, oh, look, this card expires in August and this person will be at home and done with their deployment by then, so I'll give them this card. Don't do that, because we can't load money on the card because it's within 90 days of the embossed expiration date. It's not really embossed, it's just printed, but you get the idea. Couple of mission card myths. We talked about expiration just now. There's this myth out there that will be out there until hell freezes over, that mission cards miraculously cease working at out processing. That doesn't happen. There's the out processing bone is not connected to the mission card bone. I spoke about the second one earlier. Old farts like me are used to going to an ATM and taking out cash and then paying for lunch with the cash. That's not the way we want it to happen. We want people to pay for their $3.50 meal by giving the person their mission card. One of the problems with taking out cash is that if you don't spend it, you got to return it. And that's a pain. What I do, and this is me, I generally just use my own money for things that I'm going to spend cash for, which are kind of vanishingly rare these days, and keep track of it. And then at the end of the deployment, I say, okay, well, the Red Cross owes me $80. So I go to the ATM and I get $80. I find that to be the best method. Last one, you can't pay for your baggage fee using your mission card. This was actually true for a very long time. And it's a consequence of the happy person who bought an airline ticket with his mission card. And our fine leadership decided, well, damn, that's not going to ever happen again. And so they just closed down anything that was related to an airport. You couldn't use your mission card. Well, that's been reversed mostly. The airlines specifically have been reversed. You can pay for your baggage fee with a mission card now. I know this because I've seen the charges come across on a mission card. So I know it's possible. Now, I also have heard of problems with people trying to use their mission card at those self-service kiosks at the airport. I don't know exactly what the problem is, but some of the kiosks for some of the airlines, if the relative humidity is such and such, don't like mission cards. If you go to the agent at the desk, they should be able to take care of you there with your mission card. So the fact of not being able to pay for your baggage fee is no longer true. Reloads. When people run out of money, and don't wait until you got $1.18 left on the card. This is a separate team. You don't care about that, but I do. They have a separate email address. And the app that Julie talked about last week should help us in terms of requesting reloads. But it used to be that the supervisor requested the reload. That's no longer the case. The worker requests the reload. There are instructions. If the worker needs to send a manual email, they are there on the exchange. But basically, the worker should request a reload when they get down in the $100 range, maybe a little less, depending. Reloads will examine things like how much longer they're going to be on the job. If Reloads sees a bunch of ATM withdrawals, they're going to ask for receipts. You should always keep receipts anyway. Normally, you won't need them if you follow the rules, but keep your receipts. As a tangent, and this is one of my personal bugaboos, it's like we went out of our way here to create confusing email addresses. So we've talked about Disaster Staff Card, which calls it a staff card from years ago. The address for getting your staff card reloaded is Mission Card Reload. So that's nice and confusing. There are two addresses for RMS and staffing, and the general rule is RMS owns the person from the time they're assigned until they walk in to check in to the DRO. Staffing owns them after that. So you use the RMS address, which is Disaster Staffing Center with no dots for the first part, and you use disaster.staffing with a dot if you need to get to the staffing folks after the person's checked in. So if that's not confusing enough, I guess I could try to work on it and make it a little bit more confusing, but anyway.
Hey, Steve, I'm going to interrupt you because, not because I want you to make it more confusing, but because we have some things in chat that I think are worth mentioning.
Great.
So the first is that the mission cardholder overview class barely touches the surface of the complexities and the, oh, by the way, don't do this and this and that type of information. And I will say, for me personally, it was difficult to remember when I took the class, and then there was a large period of time before I first deployed, and I had to go back and review because I'm like, what was that? I can't remember, especially the one about the parking at the airport.
Yes.
Another response, a suggestion that's a really good suggestion, and I've done this for myself, is I tell responders to put their initials or mark on the front of the card with a Sharpie before they leave, along with the DR number, as a reminder that it can only be used for that DRO.
Yes, that's a good idea. I agree.
Me too, and I keep it bundled with my receipts, and then shelf it just in case I'm asked for them later. And then Irene writes, what about the old suggestion to take cash out when you go to a disaster where there won't be electricity to run ATMs and credit machines in stores? And I have that same question because you're told that advice, but at the same time, like you mentioned, you don't really want to take cash out if you don't need to, because that might prompt, not suspicion, but it might prompt you to be asked for receipts.
Well, let me ask you a question, Sherry. When was the last time you deployed to a DR which had no electricity?
So I would say the last time it was in parts of Louisiana. And I will say that most of the businesses where I would use that card also were not open to try and use a card or even spend cash. So I get your point that it's usually not something that occurs as much as it used to.
Well, and that's true, but it does still occur. And
Yeah.
For all of the people here listening who recruit and deploy people, the thing to do is to know, and if it is the case where that situation exists, then yes, it makes sense to take out more cash than usual. I mean, I wouldn't take out more than like $100 unless you were really sure that you were going to need it. The big point is, and this is especially applicable to, as I said, old farts like me who are used to using cash. In the normal state of affairs, don't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, we want people to use the card to purchase their individual purchases. And selfishly, that allows the folks at Reloads to see that all of the purchases are legitimate, or for rental car gasoline, they can see that too. So that's the reason behind it.
Okay. Our next question is, will the reload team check with supervisors before reloading, especially regarding the length of the time the person has remaining on the DRO?
Yes, the answer to that is a very simple yes.
Okay. And then, is it still true that the total amount of all your meals per day cannot exceed $35?
Well, yes, but that's kind of a lie. And if you average it out, and I think most people do this,
It's an average. Okay, so if I eat out of a machine today and spend $5, tomorrow I can spend, $60, and average. If you average it over the DRO, that's basically what they're going to do. Is look at, okay, this guy was on the job for 10 days, and they spent $300 on food. That's reasonable. This guy was on the job for 10 days and they spent $600 on food. Well, no, that's not reasonable. So it's really a guideline. It's a rule, but it's not taken meal by meal or day by day.
Thank you. What if a volunteer who is deployed for 2 weeks and uses up the $450 in 4 days?
Well, then they're going to send a request for a reloads, and reloads is going to look at it and say, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, and we had someone respond, thank you. As long as they can prove the expenses are within the Red Cross rules, they will reload.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you keep your receipts.
Right. And then Dorothy comments, Eleanor, they had better have good receipts. I can almost hear the tone in that, Dorothy. I like it. Maricel comments, I had someone in Sandy that she wanted to reload 5 days later because she used the funds for family gift, and she had not even showed up for work one of the days. I sent her home and she got a Red Cross bill. Oh, wow.
Oh, good.
So yeah, so that can be what happens, I guess, if somebody uses something irresponsibly, they will be asked to reimburse the Red Cross. Lorraine makes a comment. We are always answering mission card questions and orientations, and she puts in capital letters, always. People do get confused about the rules. And like I said, for me, that happened as well because I was so used to deploying locally, and it had been such a period of time between when I took that training and then my initial out of town deployment. I thought I knew the rules, but I didn't.
Oh, but Sherry, of course you went and took the training again, right?
Well, I did. I had to go re-review, but I did make a mistake. And I had to get, and it was a huge process, and I felt terrible because I should have known the rules better.
Well, here's one rule that I haven't mentioned yet. Never, ever give your mission card to the hotel for, quote, incidentals. Just say no. Just like 99% of our volunteers are honest, but we have 1% who give us these beautiful stories about getting a bill from the Red Cross. Most hotels are above board, but not all of them. And if you want incidentals at a hotel, you absolutely positively can't live without incidentals at a hotel. You've got to use your own personal card. I have entirely too many war stories from people who gave mission cards to hotels, including one where the hotel somehow managed to charge $800 to a card that was loaded for $450. I don't know how. It was fascinating indeed.
So, and a lot of times that's just inexperienced people working the entry-level positions at hotels and
That's
motels.
True.
I would say a lot of times it's not intention, it's just lack of understanding of how their systems work and mistakes. We have a couple more things in chat I want to point out really quick. Luann adds, when I assign someone, I always suggest they review mission card training video before leaving. Excellent suggestion. It at least gives some reminder, even if it doesn't cover all, and it might prompt questions for those things that it doesn't cover. True. Lorraine adds, incidentals seems to be open to interpretation. Exactly. I think that's a huge confusion piece too with the hotels. And Melissa adds, it would be very helpful to have a comprehensive searchable FAQ, frequently asked questions, in the new responder portion of the Volunteer Connection app, where all of these questions and answers and suggestions could be maintained so that all responders could access the same info. Wow, and that would probably save a lot of those questions that always come in.
Well,
So-
and I actually think that is an intent for the application.
Excellent and exciting news. So that clears chat for now. Thank you.
I only have like one more slide here, and then we'll take questions, but we just took questions. I was a little generous here saying tracking via reports. There's actually only one. And that's the DRO assignments with MCPC or mission card info. And it's a very straightforward report that basically gives you the proxy numbers for folks who have mission cards. Obviously, it can only report what it knows. So if someone got their mission card loaded because someone sent an old-fashioned email and it never got put in volunteer connection, it's not going to show on the report. Well, yeah, duh, that's true. So you caught me right at the end of on my last slide there, and we're almost out of time, but we got time for a few more questions if there are any. Luann, it's a
Hi,
very
thanks,
small time.
Steve. Yeah, I just had a quick question, kind of more for just kind of ask the group here. When I've had someone who's been assigned, and you mentioned it earlier, the DRO prematurely in-processes them. Is it appropriate to call the DRO staffing and say, since you did that, here's the proxy number, and have them submit it as part of the, part of their disaster management screen? Or is it better to send it as an email?
Well, I can give you two completely different opinions on that. My own personal opinion. I would think it would be highly appropriate to give them a hard time, and to have them do the job for you. But from the point of view of knowing that the card is loaded, if you send the email, you're going to get your own confirmation. So
That's true, right?
You pick your poison.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Steve,
Well,
this is Susan again. I just wanted to thank you for coming and entertaining us, and giving us information at the same time. And I appreciate everyone who asked questions, because it is something that comes up a lot. And speaking of, so Lorraine mentioned that it's a question that comes up during orientations a lot. We are going to be talking about orientations next week. Lorraine's going to be on with Melissa, and they're going to be talking about training on a DR, specifically orientations, as well as some tricks and tips for using Teams with a special emphasis on PowerPoint presentations. So looks like we have one more question, one more hand raised before you go, Steve. Let's see. It looks like we've got a couple. Heather, do you have a question?
Yeah, it's along the same lines of who asks for the load. I'm thinking mainly of virtual responders who might be, in process to the DRO before they actually even ask us about getting reimbursed for data expenses. And again, because the card is going to come locally, do we just send that as an email request then?
Yes. And by magic, it will be loaded for $53 instead of $150.
Thanks.
There's that magic again. All right, Dorothy, do you have a question?
So before, when we sent the email, the old-fashioned way to get a load, we had a little template that I used to keep at the top of my email pin. Is there a place that we can find out the questions that you're going to ask us, or do we just sort of make up as many answers? Give you as many answers as we think you want?
Well, you could do that, but the same document that was used years ago when we used to use the document is still out there.
So it's on the exchange somewhere?
It's on the exchange. It's one of those links that I put in the first slide, and it lists the the information that's required. To tell you the honest truth, we need the person's name and volunteer connection member number and the proxy. That's all we really, really need. But the standard says you got to send all this other stuff, so you got to follow the standard.
I remember carefully typing and retyping on my template.
Yes, yes.
What the template said.
We call those the good old days.
Yes.
I have one more question. If a responder receives their mission card after they are in processing at the DRO, whose responsibility is that authority form? Is that again our responsibility? And should we attempt to get it? I almost never see that when that's happened.
I would say that the person who issues the card has the responsibility for getting the authority form, which in this case would be the DR. Now that's, and you know, if they were really good folks, they would upload it into the person's volunteer connection profile, but I don't think I've ever seen that happen. So yes, it's an issue that I don't have a very good answer for.
Yeah, it's sort of similar to that confirmation email. If you do it yourself, then you know it's done. And so we can actually get that proxy number from that report that you were mentioning, right?
Assuming that the operation did it, quote, the right way, unquote, yes. And they probably do, because that'd be the easiest thing for them to do.
Awesome, thanks.
Well, thank you everyone for all of your questions and all of your participation in chat. That clears all the hands and it clears everything that had been asked in chat, though we did get a lot of thank you and good presentations. So thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I got to get out of here. I understand that Susan will hit me with a lightning bolt if I go over time too much.
She probably
be
will.
careful.
She has those powers.
Like magic again. Thanks again, Steve. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope everyone takes this and uses it. Take care.
Thanks, Steve. Hope to see you on here again sometime soon.
And did you specify 2 cups? I did.